What's up, guys? Matthew here, back at it again with another board game review. Today, we're going to be looking at Carcassonne by Klaus Jürgen Raid. I butchered that. I can't pronounce German names. Why? I took 2 years of German. I was in high school, but I still took 2 years of German, okay? Okay, check out my rep, yo. Now, it's no surprise that some of the best games we have ever had have come right out of Germany. There's just something about Germany that they just get it. They just get board games. They understand board games. They understand what makes a board game fun and how to make it fun, but simple and easy to learn. I don't blame anyone that looks at the game Carcassonne and thinks to themselves, I don't know if that's for me. That looks like one of those Dungeons and Dragons types, huh? But maybe after this review, you'll give it a shot. Now, Carcassonne is a city building game, but not in your standard city building game, whereas you have a map and you just put stuff on the map. Instead, you're building the map from scratch. The whole lore behind Carcassonne is that you're trying to rebuild the city of Carcassonne. And to do that, you have to build everything from scratch, from the roads to the surrounding towns, to the farms, to the churches. You have to build it all. But Carcassonne simply can't be built by just one person. There will be competing contractors that you will play against in building the great city. And in competing with them, you'll be vying to dominate most of the board with the most amount of points in building. You will have a group of followers to surround you, or as I like to call them, little meeples. Oh, look at that. Look at these little guys. Oh, look at that. Look at these guys. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the game ends finally when the city has been built fully. Now you know how to play? Okay, get to it. Chop. Report to me back on Monday. And make sure you file those TPS reports, okay, Tim? But that's basically the gist of Carcassonne. But let's go more in depth on how to actually play. Now, Carcassonne is a tile-based game, and in the city-building atmosphere, you start with no board, except for just one tile in the middle of the board, which will be the starting tile, which is indicated by the back of the tile, which has an inverted color scheme rather than the other tiles, essentially. So on your turn, you're going to be drawing a tile from the deck and placing it wherever makes sense. And by that, I mean the landscape on the edges of the tile have to match with the landscape of the tile you're connecting it to. Tiles have to always be connected to each other some way. You can't do like a diagonal thing going. You have to always be connecting adjacent to a tile. Now you might be asking me what connects properly. Like what are the specifics that make sense with the board arrangement? Well, it's as simple as just looking at two tiles that you're connecting and looking and asking yourself, do these both match? Like, for example, if you had one side of your tile that was completely all city and you tried to connect it straight to just a grassy area, then you'd be looking at it and be like, that doesn't make sense. There's no wall there. There's no wall that indicates that the city was going to end right away. So you just have to look at it and think to yourself, what would an artist do? So it's not hard to understand what fits and what doesn't. Now, after you place a tile, then you place your meeple. Now, meeple, like I mentioned, are your followers. They're following you as a contractor and helping you solidify your dominance on Carcassonne. Placing a meeple is going to help you score in the game. You have a limited amount of meeples that you'll be able to use to score points, one of which will be on the official scoreboard to keep track of where you are on points and stuff. But once the meeple is placed, then the board is reviewed for scoring. Now, upon the tile being placed, any meeples that suddenly see themselves scoring as a result of the tile being placed will now receive points based off of where they are, and we'll go over where you can get points and stuff. If points are to be attained, then the meeples that collected the points for you will be returned to the hands of their rightful owners. If there's nothing that can be scored on that turn, then the meeple will remain in its place. So in summation, with the limited amount of meeples that you have, placing them on the board willy-nilly is not always the best option because you might run out of meeples and you won't be able to score anything until the end game. But that being said, the end game scoring is going to be lesser than what you could be achieving during the regular game. So what types of scoring can you do? Well, the base game comes with a mini expansion as well as an alternative set of rules that you can add to the game. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover the base game rules and then go over the additional rules later. There are only 3 ways to score in the base rule set. You have roads, cities, and monasteries. Now, placing a meeple on the road is considered putting a highwayman down. Now, the highwayman takes dominance of the road so long as it's connected to it. So the road can be as long as you want, and as long as there's a highwayman on the road as it's being built, it will still maintain dominance of that entire road. That means that no other meeples can share the road with the highwayman, in theory. Essentially, whenever a meeple claims an area, then another player cannot claim that area anymore. However, there are going to be many situations in which there will be a road that's partially built, and then there's a gap, and then there's another road that could connect to the road, but it hasn't fully connected yet. So another player might put a meeple down as a means to say that they're going to put themselves on the road before it's built, essentially. And in those scenarios, if the road ends up connecting and now you have 2 meeples guarding the road, in those scenarios, then both players will receive points once the road is complete. But meeples from different sides can't share the same road that they are both on. Regardless, you have a meeple on the road, and you'll be scoring 1 point for every tile that road is connected to, from one gate to another. And what I mean by gate is that it's a road end. It's an actual endpoint to the road. It's either a gate into the city, or the road goes into a village, which will split off into other roads, or so on and so forth. If there are 2 actual ends to the road that the highwayman is guarding, then they'll be able to score points on it. And like I said, it is 1 point per tile. So once you score, you count up the amount of tiles that the highwayman had, and then just add that to your score. Now, cities follow a similar principle to roads. That is, you cannot share them with anyone, with the exception of gaps in between tiles and so on and so forth, and that they'll be scored tile to tile. However, cities accumulate more points than roads, as far as the statistically is concerned. A city is completed once it's walled completely around, and the player whose meeple was dominating that city will receive 2 points for every tile that city area has. Some city tiles will have a shield on them, and they indicate an additional 2 points per shield on the completed city. Last up, we have monasteries, and these ones have a big score bonus associated with them. However, they can be harder to complete. Essentially, with a meeple on a monastery, you have the potential of scoring 9 points. Now, to do that, your monastery has to be completely surrounded by tiles. So that is to say, it scores 1 point for every tile surrounding it, including its own. But the only way to score it is to surround it. So you end up scoring 9 points just because that's what you get. And those are the base rules. Now, what about endgame? I mentioned in the beginning a little bit that there's some endgame points you can get. Well, essentially, the endgame just allows for points to be given on the board to meeples that haven't returned to any player's hand. When it comes to roads are the only ones in which they will add up normally like roads would if they were completed. So in the endgame, you're counting up your roads based off of 1 point per tile. So nothing changes there. However, cities now are only worth 1 point per tile that the city was built around. Same with shields, they're only 1 point in endgame. And these endgame cities are obviously cities that were never completed, that could never be completed, but had a meeple on them. Monasteries are the same thing, 1 point per tile in the surrounding area. However, the difference being the monastery wasn't completed, so you're getting less than 9 points on the return there. Well, there's another rule called the farming rule, where it allows you to sacrifice a meeple essentially for the entire game in hopes that you can bring back a lot of points. Setting down a farmer is real simple. You choose a spot of grass in the game and you set a farmer down lying down on the grass. And essentially that meeple is going to take dominance of the surrounding grassy areas. And what's going to separate one player's farm from another is going to be roads and walls and so on and so forth. Placing down a farmer is very risky because you will never get that meeple back till the end of the game. So your hope is that you'll receive a better return in points as a result of putting the meeple down. The way farmers are scored is that in the farm that they own, based off of the barriers created by the roads and the city walls, they will receive 3 points for every completed city in that farm. And they will receive no points if they are on a farm that has no completed cities. So that you see kind of where the risk is. The other thing that the base game includes is a mini expansion called the River and the Abbot. Now, first up is a select amount of river tiles, which you will play before actually playing the base game. And what you're doing is you're establishing the river before the game starts. And what the river is, it's just a block, essentially. A way to make the game harder to build around, essentially. Each player will take a turn placing a river tile down and molding the river to where it should be. The only rule is that the river cannot U-turn back around. It has to always be moving downward. Now, next up is the Abbot. Now, the Abbot is an extra meeple that will be added to your pile. Now, what the Abbot does is that it can place itself on not only monasteries, but also little gardens that are located on the tiles as well. So if you're looking to make use of the gardens, then the Abbot's your guy, dude. Placing an Abbot on a garden or a monastery will have the same effect as either or. The gardens are essentially just another monastery. However, only the Abbots are allowed to place themselves on them. Now you're asking yourself, what's the point of the Abbot? Well, the Abbot has a special ability. On your turn, instead of placing a meeple, you can choose to remove the Abbot from the board and back into your hand. In doing so, you will score points based off what the Abbot was sitting on. So if the Abbot is sitting on a monastery, even if the monastery isn't complete, the Abbot will help you receive points based off of what was complete on the monastery. So just like the end game, where you're just going to be scoring points per tile, even if the monastery isn't complete, you're doing this with the Abbot. And same thing with gardens. Gardens are just another monastery. So you remove the Abbot from the garden, and then you score based off of what you had. And that's it. That's Carcassonne. That is the base game of Carcassonne right there. We covered pretty much everything. It's such an easy game to pick up and play. I highly recommend it. When I first picked it up, I was kind of skeptical too, but after playing it a few times, I was like, this is really good. It's really solid gameplay. And I can't recommend it enough. I think it's definitely fun to play and see how your board gets built, because boards will always be built differently. So that's also a good charm of the game, is that it's always going to be a different board when you play it. So that's really all I have to say about Carcassonne. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you all next week. Peace out.